Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this latest Transatlanticists webinar. I'm Oliver Ward. I'm the founder of Transatlanticists, and our webinar today is on the subject of navigating the American workplace as an expat. And for those in the UK, good afternoon. If you're in the US, good morning. And I'm very excited today to be joined by our good friends at Impact Group. So let me introduce them very quickly, and I'll also let them talk about their own experiences and background. We have Lucy Foster, who is the Global Account Manager at Impact Group. She's been at the company since 2012, drawing on her professional and personal relocation experiences in Russia and Dubai. She has professional roots in HR and outplacement, helping individuals navigate change with clarity and confidence. Now based in the UK, she continues to support the relocation and outplacement divisions at Impact Group. Tracy Stewart Kautzmann is Director of Global Client Relations at Impact Group and a dual American-French citizen, which will be very handy for our discussion today. She has relocated 14 times across 7 countries, and she has deep experience in career coaching, change management. She brings a global perspective to every conversation. She's based in Basel, which is at the intersection of Switzerland, France, Germany. And she's been a key leader at Impact Group since 2005. Lucy and Tracy, very nice to have you here. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Oliver. Thanks so much for inviting us to be part of this today. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. As you said, I'm Lucy. I have been with Impact Group now for quite a long time. But my background has always sort of been in the international space. I've been an expat on and off since I was 5. So I went to an American school when I was younger, and I just kind of feel like I was always destined to find the relocation industry, but only found it in 2012 when I was in Dubai and helping families moving in and make the cultural adjustments there. And then as I've moved into the account management role, Impact Group is an American headquartered company. So I do go to head office quite frequently. Obviously, I'm speaking with my American colleagues on a daily basis. And there are, as much that there is that unifies and we have in common, there are a lot of differences as well. So it'll be good to explore some of those today.
And I'm Tracy. Thank you, Oliver, for inviting us to join you today. Just like Lucy, I was an expat child. I was an expat wife. I was an expat myself. So relocation is my second name. I love our industry, and I love just meeting so many fascinating individuals and working with them. I was a typical third culture kid, so an American by birth, having grown up and lived my whole life, other than the first 2 years, in France and then Germany. So I was one of those child who went back to university in the States in order to really learn English, and found it really difficult because I wasn't truly the typical American either. So struggled with finding my own roots back in the States, and ended up leaving after university pretty much. So.
Well, thank you both for being here. Very excited to get your insights today. Just a bit about me. I'm a US immigration lawyer. So I moved to the US myself in the last few months. So this is very much a personal mission for me. I have worked for a few different companies in the US now since 2010, all very different, non-profit to law firm to judicial chambers to big companies. So I do have some firsthand experience of what it's like to work in America, and that is, what we're trying to do here at Transatlantic is help people cross the pond with confidence and give you all the resources that you need to not just survive, but also thrive in the US, whether that's these webinars or our resources online, our podcast, our community on our Discord server, just anything we can do to help people navigate that big change. We are here to help. And I think, as Tracy and Lucy have touched upon, it is a big change moving from the UK to the US, or from anywhere to the US, to be honest. And what I want to talk about first is why this webinar is necessary, because some people might argue that we speak the same language, we absorb American culture, we watch the same TV and film shows. We know the Americans, they know us. There's no culture shock here. So sort of trying to justify our own existence for a few seconds. Then we'll go on to talk about some of the terms and conditions of employment, the differences between the UK and the US. And obviously we're going to be talking in very, very broad strokes, because America is very much 50 different countries in one. And whether you're in New York or LA or Texas or, the Midwest, your experiences will be very different. And it's we are going to have to generalize, but it's important to know that it's going to depend on your industry, your role, your individual colleagues on a personal level. So we'll do our best to make it applicable to as many people as we can, while acknowledging that variation. And then we'll talk about some workplace culture and communication differences, how we actually interact in the workplace. And some people are on their laptops at home these days, so the office culture discussion is taking a new turn since COVID, especially. And then we'll talk about how you make the most of a move. What can you do to fit in, to acclimatize, or benefit from this exciting opportunity. And then we'll take questions for anyone who has them. So as we begin that discussion, I want to share with you some of the insights we had from our social media pages. I asked people what their perspective was on the differences, and we had a wide variation of responses, I should say. These are the most polite versions and the most PG ones. But as you can see, people have had very interesting transitions. Some people miss talking about football on a Monday morning. You would still talk about football, but it'll just be a different shaped ball. People's dress code will be different, especially after COVID. People are rocking up in not quite their pajamas, but they are much more casual in the US, I would say, with some exceptions, particularly, in my industry, in the legal world, there's still that residual dressing up in many ways. And then other stuff that we'll talk about, how they communicate, how different senses of humor go down, and the big ones, healthcare and pay and that kind of thing. So we'll dive into this, but I just wanted to share with you what the voice of the people. So Tracy or Lucy, whoever wants to go first, let's talk about why are we here? Why do people think America is such an easy move, and why are they wrong?
I'm happy to start with that. I think there is this assumption that we are very similar, and we are, and I think that the differences are underestimated. I think people think, oh well, we speak the same language, there's no language barrier. We all watch American movies and they watch British stuff, and it's interchangeable. And while it's true that there aren't massive cultural divides like there are if you're moving, let's say, from the UK to Asia, it's a very different proposition. But there are those cultural differences, and they're subtle, but they do make a difference to your social interactions as well as your professional interactions. And there are norms and values and behaviors that are different to how we would do things over in the UK. And so we have to understand those differences. We have to be prepared for those differences and just really think about ways that we need to adapt to it. I think that's something that's very important to impress upon that, when we're moving to a country, the onus is on us to make the switches that are necessary versus expecting them just to adapt to us. So having that knowledge and that preparation just allows you to be a little bit more successful. And from my perspective, with working for an American company, thinking, well, it will be easy. Whereas sometimes I've attended meetings and I thought, I haven't got a clue what you guys are talking about, because they'll be making references to a sport or something that is just not something that I've grown up with. So they're small differences, but they are significant enough to really change the meaning of things and change the corporate culture, that we really should be mindful of it.
To just add on to what you said, Lucy, with the word subtle, again, that the language, I mean, the actual language, not even the accent, because that's very different, but the language is the same, but every single country has a culture of their own. And the unwritten norms and rules that we grow up with come from that country. It is not, I think of my American friends and how they raise their children, my British friends and how they raise their children. And, you know, if I think just of the UK, not even just France and the other country, but the UK has history and the wealth of that, the courts, the royalty, the boarding schools, all of that really does influence how you raise your children. What is considered respectful? What is considered the norm? You know, I often hear even Lucy when she says, you know, she'll use the word. I had an example in mind, but it's like even at the table, or, you know, be proper. You know, pick yourself up. We eat a certain way. We don't slouch. We don't, you know, and even the way we have our hands at the table, you know, all those things are unwritten rules, but we grow up with them. And it's the same in the States. There's so much that you don't even realize you learn from, you know, a childhood, and so that's what it can be shocking when you come to the States. If even though you speak fluently, they expect that you understand everything that they're doing, but it comes from history, and it comes from, you know, that casual, the anti-noble in a way. You know, we don't have that hierarchy. We'll use first names. You know, all of that comes from somewhere. You know, and it's deeply ingrained in us, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about the first names. It was one of the consistent responses that we got to this question of what was different. People often said that they could talk to, it was more of a flat structure. There was less hierarchy. We're less rooted in that class system that we have in the UK. People said, you know, I talk to my superiors by their first name, and it's a really strange difference. And again, with the caveat that some people may have moved to the US in a different generation, or even, you know, 15, 20 years ago, it might look different to now. And, you know, if you're working in Silicon Valley, it's going to be even, you know, flatter structure than that. So, but it's true, there are all this baggage that we grow up with, and that we, you know, whether we're British or American or otherwise. So that's, yeah, really important to bear in mind. Let's talk about the terms and conditions. So you know, whether you're moving to America on for example, on an L1 transfer visa, or your spouse has moved and you're working in an office, and you know, you'll get your contract and you'll look at the terms and conditions and think, wow, this is interesting. And some of that will be to do with the benefits, the pay, the time off that you can take, holiday, PTO. Even the terms are different. You know, back in the UK, we have annual leave, and when I told my boss, "Oh, what's my annual leave?" and she was like, "What are you talking about? I've never heard this expression in my life." So we're talking about PTO in the US, and Tracy, maybe you can help enlighten us on that, especially because it'll be top of people's minds. You know, how much everyone knows, as this slide says, Americans live to work, Brits work to live. And you know, maybe that's unfair, but it's that Protestant work ethic that America is famous for, which leads many people to think that, you know, you don't really get as much holiday in the US, and they're just a hardworking people, and that can take some getting used to. What's your take on that?
Yeah, and I think, Oliver, something to remember is not all companies in the US have that flexibility, but working from your vacation home, or, you know, leaving early on Friday to make your weekend as long as possible. Those are all perks in a way, because they do acknowledge that 2 weeks of PTO plus sick days. They usually add PTO is personal time off, if people don't know, and it's basically making sure that the company is the winner and not the employee. For example, the fact that a lot of companies will add sick days, a certain amount of sick days that you can take, they will add that to PTO, meaning if you don't take that, you can take it for another personal reason or a vacation or a holiday. So it's always encouraging you to not be sick or to, not abuse of the system in a way, which is true in Europe. I grew up with 5 weeks, 6 weeks off, a year. Never did we add our sick days into a vape. Like, that's unheard of here.
Sorry, Lucy, go.
I was just going to say, our company, we can also get 2 days for volunteering, because obviously they're big on social responsibility. So if you, wanted to take time off, we get 2 days for volunteering. We also get a day for transition. So if you're moving, you can take that as a day as well. And then there are bereavement days too. So on top of the standard, these are additional ones that you could take off as well. So it's to add it up a little bit. On top of obviously the national holidays too. So it's a little bit more than you might think, but not every company is going to offer those additional ones like ours does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think,
sorry,
Tracy. I was going to say some companies have and to your point about, making sure the employer wins, there's this concept increasingly, I think especially in the West Coast, California, Silicon Valley, of unlimited PTO, where you have these arrangements where in theory you can have as much time off as you like and as much PTO as you like. In practice, I'm not sure whether that's actually resulting in people taking more holiday, or whether there's some unspoken pressure to not actually, people end up taking even less than they were before under unlimited PTO, and the employer doesn't have to pay off an employee when they leave and have all this accumulated time. So even those seemingly enlightened policies and those PTO policies, even they can work in favor of the employer. But carry on, Tracy.
I think the sentence I'm seeing here, that realizing that Americans live to work, Brits work to live, it is conceived that way. Again, I cannot say from all my extended family or friends that they're working 70, 80-hour weeks. They're not. Not everyone. However, to be fully present all the time, that if somebody from work texts you on a weekend or in the evening, there is that almost that unwritten rule that you will respond. So I think that's maybe that feeling of, I need to always be on. Especially for Lucy and I, our job, it's not as if somebody else can do our job. It's not as if we have a set, time where somebody can take your responsibilities should you be off. So there is that feeling of, we are almost, we're connected more so to a company. They become that extended family.
Yeah. I should preface everything we're saying with, we're not here to bash America. We're not here to praise America. We're just here to contrast and compare the UK and the US and all the differences and similarities that we see. And, in the legal field especially, there are those expectations that you are on even when you're off. And I've been contacted 3 a.m. on Christmas Day, 2 days into my week-long holiday for, several days in a row. It's just can be part of the culture, especially in certain fields, especially in certain industries.
And I think for some cultures coming in, if you are from a Nordic country in Europe or in France, for example, where you have 5 to 7 weeks off a year, it is shocking because you're used to being able to be off. You're encouraged to take your holiday time. they see this as healthy in Europe, whereas I don't know, I can't speak to it, whether or not a company feels it's healthy to take some time off in the States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All of our colleagues, when they go off, you know, they'll put, I'm off, but you can contact me on my cell phone. Whereas, you know, for Tracy and I, will say, well, we're off, but you can contact this person. You know, we do check our emails and things, but it is that expectation that you are going to be on the whole time. And we do have a very different idea of that. But I think that also comes from perhaps a feeling of insecurity as well, because of the terms of employment, because of the hire fire idea. You know, it's a lot easier to be made redundant and to be fired in the US than it is in Europe. You know, we've got a lot of protections and they're not there. So I think there's maybe within some organizations, employees feel that pressure to be present, to be constantly available, and to not make themselves dispensable, for fear that, you know, that could lead to them losing their job because they don't have that same level of security or the layers of protection that we have with legislation in the UK. So I think that perhaps in the background is also part of that attitude and that culture.
That's absolutely right.
The advantage of that is a ludicrous salary often, or, you know, definitely you can make more money in America than you can with all the securities we have in France or in the UK, you know, so that is, if that's important to somebody, it is an advantage.
Yeah, it works both ways, doesn't it? You may have less job security, and there is that concept, as Lucy says, of employment at will. You can be fired for any non-illegal reason, you know, as long as they're not breaking the law. It's very easy to, you know, suddenly lose your job. On the flip side of that, you know, there's more flexibility for the worker as well. You can, you know, exercise your right to change employer, and there's not necessarily that long notice period you have to serve out. But yeah, the highs can be very high in America where it comes to pay and the benefits, and also the lows can be very low. It's just that lack of safety net that we necessarily have over in the UK and in Europe particularly. So yeah, I think, you know, there's the pay gap, there's the benefits, there's you know, the healthcare as well is a big one that comes up a lot when I speak to people, where in the US we have more privatized healthcare. Not every employer is necessarily required to provide that unless they're of a certain size under the Affordable Care Act. I think it's 50 employees or more. You're obliged to provide some minimal level of healthcare, whereas the smaller employers, it's not as burdensome on them. And so, you know, in the UK we have the NHS, we have the concept of free at the point of the service, and it's just a big difference, where people are taken aback when they get to the US and realize that they either have to find their own solutions, or the benefits in that respect aren't as secure. Anything else we should touch on with regard to the terms and conditions of your employment before we go on to the culture and communication side of things?
No, I think it's just when, if you are negotiating for a position, or you are, you know, in the process of applying for a job, but just to be very clear at the outset what the kind of expectation is, to ask the questions about working hours and reality, and ask questions of people who work there, just so that you know, because as we've said, there's going to be differences within organizations depending on their own culture, where they're located. And so, you know, just ask around and ask other people working there, or ask the questions at the interview, so that you know what that culture is. And, you know, if I am sick, do I have to take that as holiday, as PTO, or, you know, what are the allowances? And then you can make an informed decision as to whether you want to get involved in that or not.
And as a foreigner, if you are moving to the States, consider, again, ask before you sign. Ask if you can take some unpaid leave. That is very popular, and have that in your contract. Ask if you can go visit your parents and work from there for 2 weeks out of the year, and then take also holiday. You know, they are flexible that way. You know, if it's possible, if it's not a government job, or, you know, something where legally you cannot work from a specific country, they do have, they will listen to your side, and they will be like, oh, that's interesting. Of course you want to see your parents, or of course you want to go see family. So if you want to work from there, there is, like we said, working from anywhere is very popular in America. So if you're saying I'm willing to go work, it's just going to be 6-hour difference, or, you know, I would say many employers are willing to do that.
Yeah, there is a sense in which things are up for negotiation. And, you know, for example, I would often go back to the UK. I would be 5, 6, 7 hours, whatever, behind my colleagues, ahead of my colleagues, I should say, in the UK. And that's, you know, as long as you're upfront about it and you communicate with your colleagues about it, there is, you know, you can negotiate that usually, and it's usually not a problem.
But just on the subject of time zones, I would say as well that, you know, our American friends are not the best at recognizing time differences. And that's, you know, sometimes when either you're setting up meetings or you do get a call. The other day, my boss was, you know, dropping me a note on Teams to say, hey, have you got 5 minutes? It's like, no, it's 10 o'clock. I'm going to bed. I'm not going to acknowledge this. And he probably didn't even register. It's like, oh, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon for me. It's like, no, it's 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So that is, you know, something to be aware of as well.
Yeah, I will say, going the other way, I've lived in the US on and off for about 10 years, and consistently my mum will always say, what's the real time? Oh, you know,
Yeah.
what's the real time? Let's talk about culture and communication. It's more fun, I think, than the basic terms and conditions of a contract. And I think my example of this is I had a boss who basically every time I drafted an email, he would tell me to put the email I'd written into ChatGPT and tell ChatGPT to make it less British, because essentially what I was doing was beating around the bush, being as indirect as I possibly could, so as not to offend anyone. And that, in the end, I kind of you know, relented and still do that to some extent when I'm emailing other American colleagues and clients, just so I can be more, you know, to the point. But it's just a representative example of the differences we have in our approach to communication. And Tracy, at some point, it would be great if you could talk about something you've written about our you know, transatlantic cousins and us, and our differences when it comes to the kinds of people we are abroad. And I think the metaphor you use is peaches and coconuts.
Coconuts.
And, you know, this can come into it a bit, but yeah, let's dive into how workplace culture, and I guess it's just culture generally, it's not limited necessarily to the workplace, but how we're different in that respect, and what people should expect when they're moving to the US from the UK.
Yeah.
I still get taken aback sometimes by some of the emails I get from colleagues in the States, particularly, let's say, people in the IT or the tech space who are not always, you know, the most wordy anyway, but I will get emails that I receive and I actually think they're quite rude. And they're not being rude, you know, they're just being so direct. There's none of the niceties that we would do. There's not, hi, how are you? Did you have a nice weekend? You know, it's just very much direct and to the point. And yeah, and sometimes I do still like, oh, whoa, okay, let's just get to the point, because yeah, as a Brit, no, totally, Oliver, I do exactly the same. It's like, you know, talk around it and be very indirect, and then in the body of the message is exactly what I want to get across, but it's just in a different way. So communication is different, that direct versus indirect, that overly polite, I guess, that we're still quite guilty of in the UK, and that, you know, apologetic. We'll say sorry about this, sorry, you know, and the Americans on the whole are not apologetic, and we actually shouldn't be apologizing. You know, they're right, really. We're apologizing for stuff we don't need to apologize for, but again, it's just that entrenched what we do. Yeah, I think that whole direct, let's get down to business, not so much of all the small talk, and, you know, I have a question, I need a response, and that's it, and none of the other fluff that we might have. And yeah, that takes a bit of getting used to.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think for me, the biggest shock I used to always have was that even at the airport while waiting for a plane, or if I was flying back from somewhere and I'd be reading a book, or, you know, I have 4 children. So airport time is my time. It's like, go away, people. And honestly, some people would literally like be looking at my book and then, oh, what book are you reading? And, you know, start sharing pictures of their kids and their vacation in Europe, and, you know, all these things where I'm going, I didn't ask you for this. And it felt very in my face, and it was always friendly, always very nice, always pleasant. You never see them again. You don't even know their first name. So in better understanding myself where all this came from was to understand that America, not all of America, Canada is not this way. Again, we're stereotyping, by the way, we're generalizing, but the US is an extroverted culture. So if you're an introvert, you have to become almost extrovert with individuals, you know, really speaking to anyone at the market, at the supermarket, at the airport. It is part of almost an unwritten rule that you do. You're friendly, and you're taught to be friendly. You're taught to say hi to everyone. You're, you know, not in an indirect talk either. It's, you know, oh, I like this. I don't like it. What do you think of this? What do you think of, you know, the president and what he did? It's very opinionated, and it can be, for some cultures, it can be very, very shocking. I can just imagine some Asian countries just going, ooh, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, so in that sense, and you were talking about the peach and the coconut, and I have lived in different coconut countries, and I've lived in some peaches countries. And basically, if you don't know what that example or is a peach culture is a culture that is very, very easy to communicate with at first. So if you look at communication from a scale of 1 to 5, the 1 to 3 is a constant, like sports, politics, how do you feel, work, you know, so that's kind of the communication. And then 4 and 5 is going deeper into intimacy, and very few friends know that part of you. Okay, so that's, and a peach culture is one where you just feel like you're becoming fast friends very quickly, but you don't get to that seed. That 4 and 5 communication is really elite to very few individuals, and that is North America. Like, they do not share with many a deeper, you know, any grieving they might go. You leave that facade. You are fine to many, and you know the very, very personal is for very few. The coconut cultures, it is very hard to even get to, you know, number 2 communication. You don't give your opinion. People don't know political views of your friends. You know, those kind of things are hard. But once you get past the shell of the coconut, you become very fast friends, and the loyalty is forever, you know. So if you look at even though the UK is a friendly, you know, you really feel very quickly warmed, and people call you lovey, and, you know, all these beautiful words, but you don't know them. You know, only your friends truly know who you are, you know, so.
Yeah. I think there is a sense in which Americans are, you know, renowned for their hospitality. They're extremely friendly. They're very warm towards Brits for the most part. You find as a Brit in America, people love talking to you. They love talking about their ancestors or their family and their friends in the UK or who've lived in the UK, and that's really nice. And you have very pleasant conversations about that. And especially around July 4th time, you know, there's all the banter around the revolution and tea and all, and that's all great. And then, but there is that a sense in which it stops at a certain point before it gets too deep. And then, once you're removed from that situation, either you go back home or you move to another company. It's kind of, and it may be true about any people in any company setting, but it kind of dissipates, and you had these very good friends for a while, and then they're gone. And so it is sort of surface level in some ways. At the same time, I had friends for many years who I've kept in touch with, and there are that elite few who have penetrated the middle of that coconut and got to know me very well, and vice versa. So yeah, that's that. I really liked that metaphor, Tracy, and thank you for explaining more cogently than I could. I think in the time that we have remaining, if there's anything else on the culture communication side, actually, I do want to touch on what is talked about in American workplaces, or some American workplaces, that we might be surprised by, or things that we should avoid as professionals moving to the US. Like, what would we expect in an American office? Things off limits, things that you wouldn't expect to be asked about, and suddenly you're being asked about.
There aren't so much of the personal boundaries or the taboos that we would have. People will ask you about your political affiliation, and obviously religion is a big part. A huge proportion of the country are practicing a mostly formal Christianity in one shape or another, and they want to know where you go to church and how you worship and things. And in the UK, we're largely agnostic, and if we are practicing, then we tend to keep that very private and to ourselves. We won't talk about money, and those sorts of things where they will talk about it and they will ask you. And we had I had a situation, actually not a Brit, but somebody moving from Spain to the States, and she was a single woman in her mid-30s, and her colleagues kept asking her, well, why are you single? Why have you not had any children? When are you going to have children? And she's like, oh my goodness me, like, this is just like so over a boundary for her. And she was asking for help and sort of how to address this, to say, this is not a topic I feel comfortable talking about. It's personal and I don't want to share it. You're my colleague. I don't want to share this stuff with you. But she didn't want to cause any offense. But yeah, she was really shocked that she was being asked all these intensely personal questions. And there isn't that same almost propriety, we would guess call it propriety, or those taboos that you can't ask people about. So I guess, go in expecting that you might be asked questions that you wouldn't normally be, and you don't have to respond, but thinking about how you don't answer in a way that's not going to upset anybody. You're not being rude. It's just you want to keep it to yourself, and those are personal feelings, personal situations. But yeah, that can often be something that is, again, depending where you are in the country, a bit of a shock for us Brits, who were a little bit more reserved about what we might want to share and keep to ourselves.
Yeah, it's difficult because I think when I do go back to the States, either I go back to our headquarters or I go into family. So it's, in family, it's more intimate. You're invited to their homes, your family. So you're intimate in that sense. I would say as a generally with colleagues, if you're experiencing work, going to happy hour with them, going for a small meal with them at a restaurant is much more common than being invited to somebody's home, other than maybe a barbecue if they do a party or something. Yeah. But then that could be outside. There isn't this come sleep over at the house, or come have a long dinner with just my family. That would take a lot more time to get to that level of deeper conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on Lucy's point about the Spanish employee being asked about when she was going to have kids, we could have had a whole separate webinar about maternity leave and paternity leave and all the conversations around that, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. But yeah, it's we've barely scratched the surface, and we're running out of time. But it's really important to be aware of these differences, and yeah, as Lucy says, sometimes you have to be diplomatically silent in your responses to, or at least divert your questioner about, you know, things you don't want to talk about to something else, whether you'd have to learn the rules of American football or something else to keep them busy. So what speaking of sport and making the most of a move, let's conclude with some thoughts on how we can really not just get through this experience, but it's something that is exciting. It's something that will probably, you know, change your life and maybe make you a better employee. Whether you go back to the UK, you'll have that worldly experience and understanding of other cultures, and there's all these things that, you know, we have to be aware of, but also we should be looking to make the most of this experience. And what's the best way of doing that as an expat or an immigrant to the US?
I would say embrace your moment there. Don't try to just have your own culture's traditions or habits. You know, if you're used to, like me, eating at 8 p.m. or having a hot meal at lunch, stop. Just embrace the American culture, and you're not going to change who you are. You're just going to learn more, and you're going to live it as an adventure, as a way to learn different ways. You're not changing yourself, but you are discovering a whole new culture. And it's by appreciating a new culture, you are not saying you don't appreciate yours. You're just embracing another moment and a chapter in your life. And it's something I really struggled with when I went to university. I felt like I was being a traitor to France because I was starting to like a certain amount of things over there. And when I understood that it didn't mean that, I started appreciating differences.
I think as well, like every time you move somewhere, there's an opportunity to try something that you wouldn't necessarily try at home, whether it is a new sport, whether it's like, I'm going to try baseball or American football, or I don't know, whatever it might be in your area. Give it a go and use it as an opportunity to develop new skills and build new friendships. I think it's a great way to get involved in the community and to meet people outside of the office. You know, put yourself out there, go and do some of the things that are maybe traditionally American, you know, go and have a good time with it. But at the same time, you know, it is okay to still want to be in touch with your roots and to have something that is familiar. And we had a friend of ours who works in the service apartment industry, and he moved over to Colorado and is a big Arsenal supporter. And one of the first things that he did, was join a golf club, I think, and then join the Arsenal football supporters, because that, I think that familiarity and that almost you've got that support network was a bit of an anchor for him, which then gave him the confidence to go out and explore more of the opportunity than perhaps he otherwise would have been. I think don't be afraid. And I think the lovely thing about Americans is they are nowhere near as judgmental as Brits are. You know, they will welcome you and they'll give you an opportunity, and you can go and have some fun and not worry about it. You know, don't worry about how you're being perceived, because they won't think about you quite the same way. You know, they would rather you succeed. If you fail, that's fine, but better to give it a go and get it wrong, and then you'll get it right next time. But you know, they're all about trying, and they'll embrace you. So yeah, go make the most of it. It's a great place.
Yeah, exactly. Lean into it. Embrace the scary aspects of it. And I think it's in that first few months you really tested. You know, even if you've had other moves before. I've now lived in France before I lived in America, and you know, because France is so close to the UK, it was always, you know, you can just pop back for a weekend on EasyJet or Ryanair or on Eurostar, and it never felt, you know, you're always within arm's reach of home. Obviously America, you're crossing an ocean, and that first few months can be rough. And
definitely.
Yeah, and that's you know, to plug our community. That's what we're here for people who are in that early stage of the move and need some resources and some community around them, because you don't want to, you know, you want to go to America and embrace the culture and not just be in your safe zone necessarily. And we're here to help you make that transition. And so is Impact Group, and coaching can be really useful as a tool to help people navigate that change and understand their new environment and their new colleagues even better. And that's true of the US, and I understand Impact Group. It's pretty much worldwide at this point. I'd correct me if I'm wrong. Yep. Wherever you're going, you can help. Yeah,
absolutely. We are everywhere.
Amazing. We had one or two questions in the chat. Thank you for showing up. And sorry, I don't know who's asked the question, but someone says, are there any good job sites that showcase benefits and perks and rank companies, for instance? I don't know of any. I know Glassdoor has first-hand reviews, that kind of thing, of employee experiences at companies. But I don't know if there's a site that has a sort of league table. It would be more of a case-by-case evaluation. I don't suppose either of you know anything like that?
No, I was going to say Glassdoor.
I think to get a look into the details, you have to leave a review about an employer, and then you can see all the juicy gossip about these employers. But then we have, what are the main differences when writing cover letters and CVs, UK versus USA? That's a great question.
Oh, that's an excellent question.
That's another webinar topic on its own.
Yeah, it really is.
You are allowed to brag, I would say, is the very first big difference. You know, you are allowed to say you exceed at something, you're excellent at something. You're expected to show excellence and definitely not weakness. You know, whereas in the UK, I assume it's a little bit more like France, where you might speak indirectly. I was given the opportunity to work on this, which I appreciated, which is a way of saying I'm really good at this, but you don't say it the same way, you know.
Definitely.
We
and have, also tried to keep to one page as well on the resume. They call it like a one page with all of the highlights and the high notes, and really, you can't go too big.
I think unless you're 15, 20 years into a career, there's no reason your resume should be more than a page long. And as Tracy and Lucy say, you've got to toot your own horn a bit more in the US, and that can be difficult for our immigration clients at the embassy who are on certain visas that require you to big yourself up a bit. So that's important. I mean, we haven't talked about language, and I think spell in American English, replace some with Zs or Zs as you see fit, and remove.
I would also think about when you're writing your resume, is also to think, job titles are different as well. So, a manager will mean different to a director, or a VP is very common in the States. It might not translate here. So think about when you're putting your job title, something, it might not be your accurate job title in the UK, but something that would be the right level, so that they can clearly understand, okay, he was working at VP level, because otherwise it won't necessarily translate. So you need to be aware of that, so that it's instantly showing what you've done. And the level
that is such a good point, Lucy, that you said, is, people don't know what they don't know. So if you need to help them a little bit by Americanizing your background, use ChatGPT if you have to, like Oliver, but just it's not against you as an individual, because it is just a marketing piece. A resume is a marketing piece only. It's not your biography. And so it's important that you make sure they understand, the HR or the managing director understands what your experience is. And so it's important to Americanize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, how are British degrees taken over there? How do we work out GPA equivalent? That's a great question as well. If you're at a certain size of company, especially if you're an international, multinational company, they will have some familiarity with British qualifications, and there are informal comparisons you can make. I think, a GPA is a 4.0 scale, and if you've got a first in your degree, then that's going to generally translate. But then beyond that, it gets a bit fuzzy, and there's no hard and fast rule, I don't think.
Yeah, you could put a bracket, for example, equivalent to, and then use the American term. you know,
Yeah.
it just situates them to, oh, okay, the A level is almost like first year degree, you know, of your bachelor. So it's it's just important that they understand the differences.
There may be some explaining to do on your part. Whether you should write your visa status on it and say, I mean, it's a tricky one because some application systems will have that question: do you require a sponsor, or will you require a sponsor at any point? And that filters out people who are authorized to work and people who aren't. There are some people who see a lot of international experience and aren't sure whether you are eligible. I don't have a good answer to the question of should you write your visa status on it. That's probably outside my wheelhouse, but
I would say if you have the visa, definitely put it on there. Say that you have that visa and you have that right to work. If you don't have it, then don't, and then cross that bridge further on down, because otherwise you run the risk of precluding yourself from the process altogether before you even get started.
Yeah. I think it can be very tricky to get American employers to sponsor for permanent residency, especially. And yeah, that'll be the least of the worries. If you can get past that point, then who knows. But some great questions, and I'm sorry we've taken us over, but I just wanted to say thank you to you both, Tracy and Lucy, for your insights today. It's been a really interesting conversation, and could you let our audience know how to get in touch with you and how they should reach you?
Well, I guess we can put our emails in the chat. And that way, if you want to reach out to us, so you may, or if not, we are on LinkedIn. I think, Lucy, the way you write your name for LinkedIn is the way you do right there. And yeah, exactly. So you can always send us a message. We'd be happy to continue the conversation.
You're looking for these faces on LinkedIn.
Definitely. And I've just put our email addresses in the chat as well. So feel free to get in touch, or our website, impactgrouphr.com. You'll be able to find us on there, or through Oliver. But be happy to help. And there's still so much yet to talk about, but we'll be happy to answer any more. Yeah.
If anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can reach me through our website, which is on the slide. And good luck to everyone navigating this move. We are here to help you. And thanks again to Tracy and Lucy. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll see you for our next webinar.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thanks for having us.